Hey folks, welcome back. I'm going to try to do a short, quick video, that's an oxymoron for me. But if you're new to my channel, welcome. Basically, I'm obsessed with model aviation and full-scale aviation. And my biggest passion is building giant-scale electric RC aircraft. And what I mean by giant scale is if it's not 150 inches or more in wingspan, it just doesn't turn me on. But this video is about my ultralight because I'm also building an ultralight. Because a couple of years ago, somebody says, hey, you're building these airplanes so big, why don't you build an ultralight? And I said, why not? Okay, well, there's a lot more to it than that. An ultralight's a lot more reasonable to afford than buying like a brand new 172. I'm not rich, so I know that's kind of a relative statement, but I'm building an ultralight, and I'm tripping all over my words this morning. So it's very early Sunday morning right now. Nobody's up yet. So here's my air bike, and my airframe, my fuselage, and it's 4130 chromoly steel, and I TIG welded it all up, and it is turning out super slick. But what we're going to talk about today is the wing. And because I got quite a few different emails saying, could you really go into how hard it was to build this wing? And I don't like to use the word that was hard. It just takes a lot of patience, and it takes getting to know things, and we'll dive into that in a minute. Before I get too far into this, I want to do a shout out to one of my awesome sponsors, RTL Fasteners, bolts, nuts, blind nuts, lock nuts, cap head screws, whatever you need as a fastener for the model aviation hobby type stuff. This is going to be it. If you go there and you buy more than $25 worth of product and you use the code DAG25, you'll get 25% off. So spend more than $25 and you will get 25% off your order if you use the code. So as I did a video last week where I talked about basically, if you want to build an air bike, what do you need to kind of consider as far as what you're going to be required to do? The tools you have, your skills, all those kind of things. But in all of that is this little bill of material of all the wood parts for the airplane. Now, there is some different types of wood out there that people use in ultralights. Okay, the Legal Eagle, you can use all pine and stuff. There's several different ultralights out there where people can just go to the hardware store and basically use whatever wood, like a pine or a fir or something like that. In these directions for the wings, it says wood refers to clear southern yellow pine or Douglas fir. Okay, spruce, and it says it on the drawings, refers to a aircraft grade Sitka spruce or a Douglas fir. So in the instructions when you first get the air bike, it says if you modify anything in this drawings or anything in building this airplane, it's not an air bike anymore. Okay, my experience of building over the years, I know how to use carbon fiber to actually make things stronger and not just heavier. There's a lot of people in the radio control world that says, oh, if you do that with carbon fiber, it'll make it lighter. No, it doesn't necessarily make it lighter. It normally makes it heavier, but it makes it extremely strong, sometimes stronger than you would ever need. An example would be laminating carbon fiber on a piece of plywood. That plywood's probably already strong enough to do what the job is required of. Adding that carbon fiber is just making it 10,000 times stronger than it needs to be. But taking a piece of balsa wood and laminating carbon fiber to it, the balsa wood would never be strong enough to support whatever the duties are of that piece of wood, but the carbon fiber would be enough to give the strength. And the carbon fiber would actually, that thin layer of carbon fiber would be lighter than using a piece of plywood. So when I build these wings, I'm using some carbon fiber toe in some places, especially if I had to splice the wood, or if I couldn't find the yellow pine or the Douglas fir, and I decided to use a higher grade pine, but by laminating some carbon fiber on it it's going to make it stronger than the plane was ever designed to be. It's just there's certain places in this wing I wanted to reinforce it because I wasn't using exactly the wood that they recommended. And to be honest, I've talked to two people that just built, all the ribs were built out of spruce, but they built all their spars out of just regular plywood and regular white pine, and the AirBikes have been flying. One of the things you'll learn is that different types of wood handle moisture over time differently, or they'll warp, or they'll stay straight. I'm sealing all the wood in this airplane with a really thin coat of epoxy resin to protect it from the elements before I cover it. So as long as you've got the wing built straight and you seal it, in my humble opinion, you're going to be okay. But try to follow the directions if you don't know what you're doing, okay? That's an understatement, right? So as we get into some of the things about building this wing, is just like I described last week's video of some of the things that are in the book and the plans that say prefab parts. If you're building the plane 100% from plans, you didn't get a kit, so there's no prefab parts. You're going to have to make all the stuff yourself. There's a lot of things that you can do while building this airplane that can really confuse you. And unless you really take your time and know the drawings on these wings and really think about it three-dimensionally, you might start to build something and then go, oh, now I get what they're doing, but you've already taken a little bit the wrong direction. That happens with anything I've ever scratch built or designed myself, and sometimes drawings just aren't clear. Okay, so don't beat yourself up if you start to glue something and you realize this isn't right. I know you wasted some money on that wood. Just throw it away, full steam ahead, and just accept that you're learning. That's one of the coolest things for when I do this stuff. What I learn when I do this is, to me, one of the coolest things. There's some really neat things in the drawings that help you understand how to create like a jig to build your ribs on. I built a little bit different system I'll show you in a minute to make it easier, because there's a lot of ribs in this airplane. And make sure you don't do something really dumb like I did. Okay, I actually ended up building all my ribs, moved on to building spars, and then found out I was short 4 ribs. So they have a number, like, I'm going to make up a number, 1 through 10 ribs. Well, in your mind, there's 10 ribs. Well, there's actually a root rib and a tip rib too. So I had forgotten to build the root rib and the tip rib, but I built 1 through 10. So make sure you physically on the drawings are counting how many ribs there are, and don't just go by what you're reading. At the top of this, it shows a kind of a jig placement of how you can take a piece of plywood and put some round dowel rods. Now, I 3D printed a bunch of stuff, and everything that I 3D printed for this is available on my Patreon, okay? And I don't like to whore out and pimp out my Patreon, because I'm only charging you, I think, $5 to join for a month and download all of my thousands of hours of stuff. But I just don't give it away, okay? So, and plus I want to kind of control who's getting it. So, if you want any of the stuff I've 3D printed, or the 3D drawings, or any of that stuff I've done for my AirBike project, you can go to my Patreon, and I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the bottom of the comments, or the information. So these drawings are in some ways very crystal clear, and sometimes as clear as mud. So what I did was, when I got my drawings, I spent 2 months studying my drawings before I bought my single piece of wood. Okay? I did buy all my 4130 chrome moly as soon as I knew what my bill of materials was to TIG weld my fuselage. But I waited a couple of months before I bought any wood. But the drawings on this, you got to get your head into, like, I'm trying to think how to explain this. There are some connections, like on the drag braces, the things that keep the wings from dragging back. Some people use cables. On this it has braces, and these are those diagonal pieces right here. Right here. These are the drag braces. The way these are connected to the top and bottom, the bottom of the spar, then there's compression pieces that help reinforce the compression of the two spars. So, and at the top right here, when you start looking at some of these drawings right here, I hope you can see my little mousy mouse. But when you look at the way this is epoxied and layered and overlapped, you've got to get your head around that to make sure that you understand how those go together. That's the reason I drew everything in Fusion 360 and 3D, to try to fit it in a 3D environment, which, when this kit was originally designed, 3D like that didn't exist. And that's one of the coolest things about technology today. And I'll show you some of that in a minute. But just going through the drawings, folks, is one of the most important things on the wing. On the fuselage, it's not that important because you're just going to be welding and lining stuff up and grinding and regrinding. And I shouldn't say that. It's important to know the fuselage drawings, but the wing drawings, I would really, especially at the top here, these spars, and there are a couple of discrepancies I found, and I don't know if it was me, but basically there are hard points on the wing that connects the strut to the fuselage. When you measure those out and align them exactly on the reinforced wood parts, they're not necessarily centered in that. And which it doesn't have to be structurally, but it would look a lot prettier if everything looked like it was, everything was just laid out like, a big model airplane kit. Is the best way to explain it. But these spars are really, really cool too. But here's one of the first 3Ds I did in Fusion 360, and this has believe it or not, every nail too that goes in the gussets. I also had a couple of people reach out to me and said, why aren't you using the staples? Because in the drawings it shows using staples holding everything together, and then you can pull the staples out later on. To me, to get a staple gun in there and get it as precise as I want it is kind of hard. But keep in mind, the people who built these ultralights were just throwing these things together to get them into the air to fly it. They weren't building it to be a museum piece 100 years from now. They're building it just to get it into the air and fly. So depending on if you want to follow the drawings exact, I'm definitely not against stapling the gussets and the ribs together, and I'll dive into that a little bit more here in a minute. But I like the nail part, and to be honest, is because when I watched the Spirit of St. Louis with Jimmy Stewart, there's actually a scene in there where they put a piece of epoxy on and put the gusset on and start nailing it. And I just thought, what the hell? I'll put 10,000 nails in this wing. And you'll see in a minute what I'm talking about. So the 3Ds of this really greatly helped me understand how to build this wing. And all of this is on my Patreon, folks. So all these JPEGs, and actually if you want the Fusion 360 file to the wings, I think I've got that on my Patreon too. If not, hit me up on my Patreon and I will share the Fusion 360 file of the wings if you want it. Now, here's the way that I built the jig table for my ribs. And this had a pivot in the middle, so I could build one rib, rotate it around, build the other rib, let the T88 epoxy cure for about 8 or 10 hours, pop them up. There were little cams on here, and I'll show you more of that in a minute, but those cams were 3D printed out of ABS so that I could just lock everything in place, build the rib, put the gussets on, turn the cams, pop it up, and go on. This was the jig table I made for my spars. This is the table I made for building the wing on it. I did go into AutoCAD and draw all the ribs because I needed these to do templates too, to 3D print parts and pieces from too. But basically this is my Fusion 360 rib. And here it's kind of hard to see, but that is a plotted out print of the ribs that were going to be on this jig table. Here are the 3D printed parts I made. This is them getting mounted. Now keep in mind, I put a piece of plexiglass under this, when I really built the table, and you can see that in this, see the reflection, and that's because any of the epoxy I might get that would go through the joint or drip down onto the table would pop right up off that. I would wax that plexiglass with my mold release every time I would do ribs, okay? And believe it or not, any drips that you get down there pop right off it, okay? So I did go into AutoCAD and draw all the gussets that get nailed on to the ribs. And I've had 2 or 3 people building the AirBike thank me so much for doing this. They said, you don't realize the amount of time. This is on my Patreon too as a CAD file, and you can just print it out. If you want it as a PDF, let me know. But these are all the gussets you need. And then I cut them out with a bandsaw. I don't have a laser cutter. And yes, I do take my time. And I have a sander. I did 3D print me a neat little holder to hold my popsicle sticks and pencils and stuff when I went to build things. This is one of the little nails that nail in the gussets. And you can buy these nails at Aircraft Spruce and Specialty. And no, they don't rust. They are covered with a coating for aircraft, folks. I had people reach out saying, this is going to rust and it's going to destroy your wing. And I'm like, what the hell, people? You know, just sit in your high chair and shut up for a minute. And I'm not just going out and buying dollhouse nails. These are aircraft spruce nails for building wings. Oh, and then I took sandwich bags and cut them so that I could put all of my gussets into a sandwich bag that was numbered. That way I could reach over and grab the right one. So here's one of the joints, and this is with the nails in it and epoxied on. Oh, one thing that drives me nuts, and hang on a minute, I want to explain this. I love Aircraft Spruce and Specialties, but when I got my spruce from them, it was garbage. It was really in bad shape. And what I mean is there was no consistency in the actual size. They're supposed to be 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. And they were all over the place. So when I would lay a 1/4 inch piece down on my jig and lay another 1/4 piece, there could be as much as a 32nd of an inch, and that makes the gusset not sit level. So I had to go through and pre-sort all of my 1/4 by 1/4 inch. I would have been better off buying like a 2x4 of spruce and stripping my own on my table saw than buying it from Aircraft Spruce. Now, maybe they just had a bad day of somebody making their 1/4 by 1/4 inch spruce, but it was garbage. And I actually reached out to them and they acted like they didn't care. But, you know, I still love Aircraft Spruce and it's the only place I go to. But now back to the show. So these are other gussets in place, and you need to make sure you follow and understand the drawings. The drawings will tell you in some of these places where you want epoxy to be and epoxy not to be. Because you're going to cut an aileron out of this part that you're looking right here, and there's certain parts here that you don't want epoxy on. So when you cut the top and bottom piece of the spruce, that's going to come off and be your aileron. Make sure you really take your time and understand the drawings. This is a bunch of the ribs I was making, minus 4, which really pissed me off because I forgot to build the root and the tip rib. This is the table that I started building for my spars. And take your time, get a laser, make sure it's straight, get a plumb line. Really take your time, folks, to make sure that if you're building a jig, it's straight. Because if the jig's not straight, then everything's going to be crooked you put on that jig table. And this was just me building the jig table, trial fitting in some of the plywood and pieces that were going to make up the spars, me clamping in and holding in place. Oh, another thing is, you can't see it very good. Lay wax paper in the bottom of this when you're building your spars. That way, if any glue gets through, seeps through, it's going to pop right up out of there. I love the wax paper. You can buy it in the cooking section at your Target or your Walmart. Triple check every time you're putting stuff in there that the measurements are right, that something's not moved around on you, or you haven't accidentally crammed something in there and moved something. I'm pretty used to being a knucklehead and cramming things in or using hammers to get things to fit in place, and I move stuff around. So you just got to be careful. Make sure you own a boatload of clamps, okay? And don't be afraid of trial fitting and trial fitting and trial fitting. Now, there's a certain point that you just got to say, okay, I'm ready to glue this thing together, okay? But on the right-hand side is the shear web which is birch plywood. That's all the wood laid in there, and it is ready to actually start being epoxied and made and all of that. Make sure you lay your wax paper in the bottom. I did 3D print some parts that were going to hold some things in place that I could use drywall screws to clamp, because they just don't make clamps to clamp in some of the ways I wanted to clamp things. Or maybe they do, and I just don't know what they are. I probably couldn't afford them. But 3D printing these little things, you don't need a lot of pressure with epoxy. Here's one of the things I've gotten into many debates with people about, and I've done testing on this. When you take two pieces of wood and put it together with like wood glue on it and you clamp it, you can pretty much clamp the living hell out of it, and it's not going to matter. If anything, it might just make it a little bit stronger, because it's going to actually push that glue into the pores of the wood. Epoxy is a little bit different. You still want clamping force on epoxy. But sometimes if you put too much on there and you squeeze out almost all your epoxy and it's a harder wood, it may not be as strong as it could be. It's probably going to be fine, and it's probably going to work great. But I had a couple people reach out to me and said, oh no, you can't use clamping forces above blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, I have been building this stuff since Jesus had a paper route. I've never had one of my epoxy joints come apart. So it's just something to think about. You don't want to put a 10,000 pound press on epoxy joints, okay? And then this was me getting everything trial fit and making sure everything's going. I'm still not epoxying yet. And you can see my wax paper in the bottom hand corner there. And I think I started epoxying now, because I can see the two clamps all the way down here, my long ones, because I ran out of the regular ones. So I think I'm epoxying this stuff together now. And then that is it, cured and ready to pop up out of it. Oh, and I got some Titebond sitting there, but the Titebond was to hold stuff. There is no Titebond in the construction of this spar. The Titebond was, I had popped a part of my jig apart a little bit, and I backed out the drywall screw, squirted some Titebond in there and screwed it back down. And I've had a lot of people say, oh my God, did you use Titebond on this? No, I didn't. But I do know a guy flying an AirBike that used Titebond on all of his spar. But the directions say to use T88. T88 is the best epoxy I've ever seen in my life. So while I've got people out there going, oh no, I built my whole thing out of Titebond wood glue. Awesome. You know, and if you're not on the news one day for laying in a cornfield dead, rock on. But the T88 epoxy is what's recommended in the drawings, folks. This is me popping out the first spar. This is my daughter holding the first spar for scale. And I tell you, folks, this was so rewarding. This thing is straight, and it's strong as hell. It's awesome. So then you've got the rear spar. Okay, so hanging up on the wall are my front spar for my left and right wing. Now on this table is my rear spar. That's another thing I forgot to mention. This jig table is not made to build two spars at once. It's made to build a front and rear spar, okay? Because there's 4 spars in this wing. And these are all my little 3D printed things for my smaller spar, the rear spar. Then I had to build a table to build the wing on. And I hate building tables to build wings on, because I want them to be so straight that all my measuring devices all line up to 0. That's my OCD, folks. It drives me nuts. But keep in mind, my garage floor is nowhere near level. And I've got that all on wheels, because what's cool is I can roll this anywhere I want in the room and keep building the airplane. You want to get all around this wing when you're epoxying. You just don't want to push a table up against the wall and try to reach over like a 48-inch cord or whatever the cord of my airfoil is to get to the other side. But I hated building this table. I'd almost rather have a kidney stone than to build these kind of tables. Another thing is, once the AirBike's done, you know, what am I going to do? Build a train set on this? I don't know. I might give it away. If someone's building an AirBike and want this table when I'm done, I might give you the table. I think I can unscrew it. I don't think I would glue some of it, but we probably could get it apart. You know, this whole table might fit in the back of my trailer that I carry my big airplanes in. So if you're really sweet to me, I might just figure out how to get the table to you, as long as you're close. So this is the table, pretty much 90% done. This was me just playing around, laying the spars on it and trying to visualize building this wing. I then decided to 3D print some pieces that would actually hold the front and rear spar, and I could shim these because my table wasn't perfectly level. It was driving me nuts, folks. So I ultimately ended up firing a laser down the top of the, actually at the other end of the table, it's blurry. You can see my laser at the far end. And I got this all zeros, folks. And then I laid my spar in there. And make sure, hang on a minute. When you 3D print a part, if you've never 3D printed and you buy a 3D printer, that very first layer is going to leave a little bit of a rim on your 3D part. You got to make sure that you cut that rim apart, or that, how do I explain that? When a 3D printer works, it's squirting molted ABS or ASA or whatever you're using, PETG, onto the table, and it makes it a little bit squished out. The layers off of that become a little bit narrower because they're just the width of whatever's printing. You want your first layer to be squished to make it stick to the table, okay, to your hotbed. But you need to remove that with an X-Acto knife or a piece of sandpaper or something. And the reason I'm saying that is that when you go to lay this in here, this won't lay completely flat down in there if there's that little piece. Flashing is not the right word, but I think hopefully you understand what I mean, especially if you've been around 3D, you know what I'm talking about. So I then started experimenting, making me some little wood jigs to try to keep everything straight, and those were garbage. I still use them for other things, but they didn't do at all what I wanted. Kind of a disaster, a lot of wasted time there, but hey, what do I got? I got time, right? And, another thing is, folks, you notice the spars hanging off the end of the table. That's not right. You need to have about 8 or 10 inches on each side of your table with a spar once you get it mounted. And here you can tell I got the spars mounted and I slid the ribs on. The front of the rib is just a butt joint against that spar. The rear spar has to slide into that rib. So you better freaking make sure that when you're building those ribs, you build to the tolerances that are on those drawings, or that spar is not going to fit. One of the scariest parts about that rear spar is, even the front spar, they have tapers. Excuse me, they have tapers on the top of the spar. And you better set up your table saw and all your stuff exactly right, because when you run that spar through that table saw, if you screw it up, you just destroyed your whole spar. I mean, I felt like, I don't take any kind of mind medication or any kind of things to calm my nerves, but if I would have had a jar of them, I would have eaten them like M&Ms before I cut those spars, because I was terrified I was going to ruin my spars. I think I got some close-up pictures that will show a little bit better that taper. But this was me just trial fitting. Nothing's epoxied here, folks. Everything's just trial fitting and playing around. And here's kind of a cool ooh-ah picture. I did 3D print all these little things, and they are to hold the ribs to the spar and put a little pressure to line everything up perfect. So let's go back. I got a whole tray of these things. And now keep in mind, if you crank it too much, it's going to break the 3D printed part. But being epoxy, you don't need a ton of force. Okay? And that's all my neat little parts holding everything in place. Another very important thing, folks, is to make sure you build some type of apparatus that's going to hold the two hard points of those spars to keep this wing straight when you build it. And I used 2 squares here, drilled it out, lined it all up, did 10,000 tests with my laser, mounted them to the table, and then connected the hard points or the connection points of the ribs to the fuselage, the spars to the fuselage, and that's how I got that straight. Now, here is something really weird. That is going to be your hinge line. And what you're seeing here, let me go to full screen. So what you're seeing here, hopefully you can see my mouse right here, is when I told you earlier certain parts of the rib will get cut that can't be epoxied and it needs to come apart. This little piece right here, hang on a minute, probably can't see my mouth, worse of crap. But right here, this is going to get cut out when you cut out the spar, and then there is a piece that goes down the length of the wing that becomes this piece right here. But I'm talking about this hinge line right here. So this part right here with the little lines is actually the shear web that goes through the aileron. Okay, this is the nose of the aileron, which you're going to wrap plywood around, but this is your hinge point. So you've got to make sure you know how you're going to drill a perfect hole there that's not going to wander all over the place. Now, the way I did this was I 3D printed a part that's going to hold it all perfectly in place for when I drill it to make sure everything's right. Now, when you cut the ailerons off the back of this wing, you can get to all of this pretty easy with a drill. But when you're building the wing, you're going to freak out a little bit and go, oh gosh, am I going to be able to drill this? Especially the middle hinge. The tip hinges won't be a problem, but that middle hinge in the middle of the wing will be problematic. So this is, oh, and here, back here is that shear web for the aileron I just talked about. And there are openings here for where that hinge is going to be. So you've got to really know how you're going to drill all of this and get this to work, okay? And there's a picture of the shear webs just laying on the back of the wing before I slid them into where the ailerons are going to be. That's the tip one. You can see this notch here. That's where your hinge is going to be. This is the other tip where the hinge is going to be. And that's me epoxying it in. Trial fit everything 1,000 times, folks. Then you've got these stiffeners on the top and bottom. And this is a place where I used more of a white pine than the Douglas fir, because this is going to be plenty strong enough. And I've talked to a whole bunch of people who built air bikes that did this, and it's not a problem. But this is just, this is the shear web for the aileron, and this is the top and bottom of that shear web. The reason you need this area here is that the leading edge of the aileron plywood is going to get epoxied to this. Okay. You got to have a good way to flip the wing upside down too, because you got to be able to epoxy everything on the bottom. And the little jigs I made work great, but here I put on some blocks just to get it up off the table high enough. And that gives you a picture of it. Don't forget, you've got to have a way to mount this to the table to keep it straight when you're building. These squares worked out to be really slick as snot. Okay. And that's it standing on its nose. And here are those gust reinforcements or gust braces. And right here you can see those compression, I can't remember what they call them. They're just called compression boards or compression wood. It basically keeps the compression off the ribs. And then you've got to get ready to do the other wing. Now, if you notice in that first wing, I didn't cut out the ailerons yet. I'm at that point. I was really nervous about cutting out the ailerons. I didn't study the drawings. I didn't have my head completely around what I was going to do yet with the ailerons. So I just wanted to build the other wing. So, you know, basically, and make sure when you build your ribs, you build a left wing and a right wing. I'm sorry. When you build your spars, you build a left wing and a right wing spar. I did want to show a modification. I actually notched and made a little bit bigger a trailing edge. The trailing edge that's in the drawings, to me, looks like hanger rash could really break your leading edge easy. So I actually made my my trailing edge. Sorry if I'm saying leading edge. This is a trailing edge. I notched it because it just looked like it was really problematic. Just a little bitty thin piece. I'm sure all the air bikes out there are fine, but I'm a knucklehead. I bump things into airplanes. And make sure you use wax paper in between anything you don't want to get epoxied when you're setting this all up. Wax paper really comes in and helps a ton. This is where I reinforced the some of the pieces of the spar with this carbon fiber toe. This stuff is so strong, folks. I mean, it is insane how strong this is. And that's a T88 epoxy. Basically, I laminated them all over my spar. And I actually should be a little bit more clear. The top and bottom piece of wood, I laminated it on the aft and the front and the top and bottom. So there's actually 3 carbon fiber toes per the top and bottom. There's 6 pieces on the wing, on each spar, I'm sorry. That's the leading edge. Also, any of the connection points for hard points, I put a little bit of carbon fiber toe in there on the insides, and I don't think I have the pictures of the outsides because I actually put carbon fiber cloth on those. One of the greatest things, hang on a minute, one of the greatest things about carbon fiber cloth is if you have a piece of plywood and you put, I think it's 6-ounce carbon fiber cloth on it, and you put a hole through it, the tear forces through it are magnified like 10 bazillion times, and I'm exaggerating. But I did some testing of taking, it was 1/4-inch white pine, laminated each side with 1/16-inch birch, then put on the carbon fiber cloth, put a bolt through it, and I think I put 1,000 pounds of weight on it. That's as much as I own, and it didn't do anything. When I did it with just the 2 pieces and the 1/4-inch wood, it elongated the whole 3/4 of an inch. That's how much the carbon fiber helped strengthen that. So just an FYI. And I'm not saying you got to do this to the air bike. I just did it. So here are my leading edges that I cut out. I cut all that by hand. I don't have a laser cutter, and I don't even know if a laser cutter cut that thick of birch ply anyway. Then these things get glued on the leading edge, and that's what's going to get butted up against it is your leading edge ribs. And you need to have a lot of clamps, folks. Now here, I'm using this blue painter tape just to hold them straight. So I take a square, I put that tape on there, and then let it cure with it straight. Now, some of the wood will have a little bit of a bow, but there's going to be a piece that goes down the leading edge of this, of wood, spruce, that will keep them all lined up. And then I cut off my aileron, everybody. And, you know, it's little things sometimes that are really intimidating, but cutting the ailerons off this wing was just like, holy crap. Even my wife made a joke and said, if you do this wrong, what happens? I said, I have to throw the whole wing away, which I wouldn't. I would figure out a way around it. But look, folks, we're starting to get into that scary part where it's going to be a point of no return if I really screw something up big on this. And that's pretty much it, folks. Wow, I thought I had a last slide there. I guess I'm not doing a very good job. But that's where I'm at right now. I cut out the ailerons, and I'm getting ready to, before I wrap the leading edge with the ply. Oh, and I know I told you in an earlier video, I was going to build big molds and do fiberglass leading edges. I've decided I'm not going to do that. When I started, I want to be really transparent with you. My dentist is an aviator who's building an RV6, and him and I were talking. I told him I was going to do fiberglass. He goes, how much weight's that going to add? And I said, you know, not that much. I use fiberglass all the time. And then I went home and I thought, you know, I need to measure this because I want this air bike to be truly a part 103. Okay, I mean, I want it. Is it part 103? Yeah, or is it one? No, I keep getting 107. That's the Android. I mean, the drone stuff. I think it's really early Sunday morning, folks. But I want this airplane to be truly legal. Okay, I don't want to have a fat, and I know there's a lot of fat ultralights out there. You know, 254 is the max. I know there's some out there at like 258. And unless you hit a building or hurt somebody, the FAA is not going to investigate you. They're not going to weigh your airplane. But I want mine to be truly legal. That's one of my little fetishes in life is I want to hit goals, okay? And when I started looking at measuring my other fiberglass, the leading edges I did on the MSL, from Emma-Stein, and the other fiberglass parts I started making, I did some calculations, and actually the fiberglass will end up being about 30% heavier. It might be more time consuming, and it might be a lot easier to put on the leading edge of the wing and the aileron, but I don't want that added weight. So I'm going to actually, now I've wrapped a lot of plywood around circumferences like that, and there's all kinds of different ways, but this is thin enough, I don't think I'm going to have to wet it much at all. You know, normally I use a Windex base or an alcohol water base or something like that, and go to the inside of the wood, not the outside, and I'll wet it a little bit and get the plywood to really bend. But I don't think I'm going to have to do this. Now, the way I'll do it will take time, because what I'm going to do is glue the bottom of it like to the leading edge. Let's say this is the airfoil. I'll glue it here, and I'll start bending it and leave it for a day. I'll bend it and leave it for a day. I'll bend it and leave it for a day. And I'll end up getting it wrapped around. And then right as I get it to the shape I want, I'll open it up, put all my epoxy and crap in there, pull it back, then put on all of my big rubber bands to hold it to the ribs, and then I'll have a leading edge. So, but that's it, folks. Sorry this went so long, but there's a lot to talk about this wing. And I've had a lot of people say, could you do a video on just the AirBike wing? And so I'll do a supplementary video to this of how the ailerons actually work and how the covering will go on, or that will be 2 videos. I don't know. But I hope you enjoy this. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to build my YouTube to make enough money to pay for my hobby and my addiction to aviation. And I always end these videos about talking about getting kids into RC, radio control aircraft. And I want to share a story with you. So I've had 2 or 3 people reach out to me and just flat out tell me that I am full of crap trying to get kids involved. Kids don't have money. Parents don't have the money. All this stuff. So I was sharing this with a friend of mine, and he kind of chuckled and he says, you know, Damon, people spend so much money taking their kids to play hockey and football and basketball and Boy Scouts and all these things. So that's rubbish that the parents don't have the time or the money to get them into RC nowadays. I mean, you can get simple little park flyer for like a couple of $100, or just a 2-channel, which I've done a video on already. But there's always ways to get kids into radio control, driving them to the airfield once or twice a week. My friend's problem was a few of the model aircraft airfields are run by old farts that are toxic to the model aviation. They hate kids, they hate their wives, they hate their dogs, they hate everybody. So they're going to hate you if you show up with a kid, especially if you got a drone. I mean, if you show up with a drone, they're just going to be like projectile vomiting their hate. But here's the reality. I've got a friend that's got a club, and once a month they have like an open night, and they have people with buddy boxes, and they're actually getting families involved. Not just the kid, not just the daughter or the son. The mom and dad are getting involved. So I still believe this is possible, and until I die, I am going to really push hard that we get more of these kids involved. If you think about some of the STEM programs out there, what is that? Science, technology, engineering, and math, I think it is. I should know that. This is what's creating the future engineers that we need. Okay? I've got a daughter who's studying to be a scientist, and she's the only female in this group of people in the lab. And that blows my mind. That just blows my mind. So, you know, everybody, I'm gonna rant and rave until I get a lot more kids involved in model aviation. Yeah, that's one of my big things, is that this excuse that mom and dads don't have the time or money is total hogwash. It's just total garbage. Because I know neighbors that drive their kids to play football and hockey and baseball 3 and 4 times a week. Soccer. Oh my gosh. I mean, when my son was in soccer, we were driving him 3 times a week and every weekend for like 8 hours. Imagine if you had that much time of model aviation. Imagine if I had that much time of model aviation. Hell, I might have passed up the Wright brothers. I'm so old, right? So look, everybody, thanks for watching my videos. And if you watch this much of it, you must be crazy or like what I'm sitting here talking about. So be safe, treat each other good, okay? Oh, and one funny thing I got to share with you. I've had 2 or 3 trolls pop out of nowhere lately on my channel, and I love it, okay? And I know I've got some friends that are trying to say, oh, Dad, don't let it get to you. Look, everybody, I know this sounds weird, but I'm the kind of person that if I'm in a Walmart and I see something really crazy going on, I love to people watch. I love to try to think what makes that person, what possesses that person to think they're better than somebody? What possesses that person to think they're smarter than somebody? So when I get a troll on here, I had a troll the other day said, well, if it's an internal combustion engine, it's an airplane. But if it's an electric, it's a toy. And I felt like saying, yeah, that's what your wife told me. But I'd get in trouble. But look, the facts is that I think it's amazing that trolls want to waste their time and spend their time on here trying to be negative. I think it cracks me up. If you don't have anything better to do than to come onto my channel and be a troll, man, you got a really messed up life. I mean, you don't have anything better to do. I mean, it sounds like you ran out of the end of the internet. There's just nothing else left of it to come and try to troll me. So rock on, everybody. Be safe, and please get kids involved in model aviation. Okay? Rock on, everybody. Take care. See you next time. Bye.